Hey, I want to go ahead and get started with this recording for our virtual food preservation series on pressure canning, and this program was scheduled for April 30th. So there again, this program is being recorded because I had a conflict in my schedule. So I'm Brenda Oftenkamp, and I just want to reiterate today where I'm going to send you out this taping that if you have any questions, please submit them as soon as you have, watched the tape or have questions that come up on pressure canning to my email. And there's my email, and I'll be sharing that several times throughout the program today. So I'm sorry that this couldn't be live, but that's the way it works out. And I thought sending out a link would be just as efficient in terms of having you gain some skills in food preservation and confidence in pressure canning. So, what needs to be pressure canned? When you think about foods, what foods do we need to pressure can versus what we did 2 weeks ago with the boiling water canning? So, anything like vegetables, meats, beans, mixed foods where you have meat and vegetables or those proteins and vegetables together, those are items that all need to be pressure canned. So these would be considered low acid. So any food that is low acid needs to be pressure canned. And the reason for that is when you pressure can, that process, reaches 240 to 250 degrees Fahrenheit, which is much higher than any other form of food preservation. And it just destroys harmful microorganisms at that level. So you reduce risk very much so. And so low acid foods like what I've mentioned, would be what you pressure can. So there again, the big thing that you need to know before you start pressure canning is your elevation. Pressure must be increased above sea level. So there again, what is your elevation? And there is the website, whatismyelevation.com. Put that in there, or even ask your, Siri on your phone, what is my elevation? And you need to know that. And I know here in North Platte and right around here, I'm at 1,832 feet roughly above sea level. And that is because if you look at this canning chart for carrots here, you need to know the food that you're going to be pressure canning, how you're going to pack those jars, as well as the size of jars. And on a research-based recipe, they usually will all come with a chart like you see on this screen. And this is for carrots, and so I can tell in what style of pack am I going to choose for my pressure canning. And there again, the top chart is for dial gauge pressure canning. The lower chart is for a weighted gauge pressure canner. So what style of pressure canner do you have? And are you going to hot pack or are you going to raw pack? And we'll talk more about what that means here in a minute. But there again, then you have to know the size of jar. Are you going to use pints or quarts? And then you see the processing time. But the real thing is that you have to know your elevation so that you can make sure that your pressure canner reaches that amount of poundage, the PSI. The pressure in that pressure gauge has to be that for the total length of processing time. So in this case, if I had a dial gauge pressure canner and I was going to can raw packed carrots, pint jars, I would process for 25 minutes. But here in North Platte, I'm at um, almost 3,000 feet. 1,832 feet. So that's 12 pounds. So I need to get my dial gauge pressure canner to 12 pounds and then set my processing time for a full 20 minutes. So we're going to talk more about that. But that's the big thing that you really need to understand and fully grasp before you pressure can. And there again, if you go to the food.unl.edu website, we have a map like this, and all the red counties across the state of Nebraska have pressure gauge testers there. And these gauge testers, you can bring in a pressure gauger and a pressure gauge to any of these offices. I would call ahead before you go, and they will calibrate your pressure gauge to make sure your gauge is reading correctly. So that's the first step when you pressure can is that you've calibrated your pressure canner gauge. If you have a weighted gauge, you do not need to have it calibrated You just need to have checked the inner gasket and the pet lock, or the pet lock or the valve gasket, to make sure that those are not hard and not flexible rubber or silicone anymore. So let's talk about the parts of a pressure canner. And here you see really the tops of each one, but the pressure dial gauge is there at the top. And this has a pointer which moves over a readable dial and indicates the pressure within the gauge. So with our carrots, we'd have to put all of our canned, or our filled jars of carrots in there, close up our dial gauge pressure canner, and then it would start building pressure, and we'd watch the dial gauge until it reached 12. And then at that point is when we'd set our processing time. The weighted gauge is you see clear over to the left there, and that's the weight that would go onto the stem or onto that steam valve vent on your gauge. If you didn't have a dial gauge, you'd have a weighted gauge. And that gauge that you see in the upper left-hand corner has 5 pounds, 10 pounds, and 15 pounds. So that's going to do the same thing as the dial gauge. It's just another way of measuring the pressure in that. The correct pressure is obtained when the regulator begins to gently rock. So if I needed to obtain 12 pounds of pressure, I'd probably put on the 15. And when it started to gently rock is when I would start my timing. The pressure regulator, or the counterweight. This is the safety device that prevents the pressure in excess of 15 pounds. So there again, you see in my picture that you have that counterweight right there in about the center top piece, and that goes over the steam vent as a safety precaution. Okay, then you have the vent pipe, or we call it the petcock or the steam vent, multiple names there, but this is the pressure regulator that fits on the vent pipe and allows excess pressure to be released. And that's where you want a steady stream of pressure coming out of that steam vent prior to putting the counterweight on. Then you have a vent or a cover lock. This is really a safety valve. And you see it in the lower picture there, just a small little bump that allows a little bit of pressure that regulates that, and it might pop up and allows excess pressure to be released. There's a vent cover lock, or a safety valve. As you start to heat the unit, it automatically releases air from the pressure cooker. This is primarily useful in locking the cover and acts as a visual indicator of this equipment and slides up and down when pressure builds up. Okay, the sealing ring or gasket, and this is in either case, whether you have a weighted gauge canner or a dial gauge pressure canner, you want to make sure that that sealing ring or the gasket is flexible. And this is the seal that helps keep the body of the canner, closed from the top. And that gasket you see is a red line there in the bottom picture. You have an overpressure plug, and this automatically reduces pressure if the vent pipe becomes clogged and pressure cannot be released normally. And so there's a lot of features, as you see, just for safety and just to help manage that pressure in there. The jar rack is at the very, very bottom picture, and this is where those jars of green beans, it looks like, are sitting in a rack. And this is the rack is always placed in the bottom and keeps the jars from sitting clear on the bottom. So as pressure and temperature rises, the food begins to boil. It's going to keep the jars from banging around or hitting the bottom of the canner. And then you have a safety fuse, and that's a thin rubber plug designed to release pressure from the canner if the temperature or the pressure becomes dangerously high. So these are all safety features, really, that are there to assure that we can safely pressure can. So here's the two different kinds of canners. You have the dial gauge there on your left and a weighted gauge on the right. And you have several different weights. And then over here to the right is that weight that says the 5, 10, or 15 pounds. So you have one or the other. And remember, dial gauge are the ones that we would recommend and USDA would recommend that you have that gauge calibrated on an annual basis. Where the weighted gauge, you can inspect yourself and just make sure that the gasket is staying flexible from year to year. Pressure canning steps. So the first step is that you're going to add water to the canner, and you're going to have that rack in the bottom of the canner, and you're going to put 2 to 3 inches of hot water in the bottom of the canner. And if you're going to be processing, meat that takes a long time, an hour and 10, an hour and 20 minutes, whatever it might be, You might need a little more than 2 to 3 inches, but generally 2 to 3 inches is all you need. And you want to get that turned on the stove and start heating that water up, because water needs to be, if you're raw packing your produce for pressure canning, that water needs to be at 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Or if you're hot packing, it needs to be at 180 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is a step that you do at the very beginning prior to filling your jars and getting things ready to go into the jars, and depending on how you're going to pack the jars. Okay, preparation. You select quality produce that's at peak ripeness. You wash, peel, and cut into, to create desired size. Make sure if you're going to cut produce up, you want uniform sizes so that the pressure can and heat penetration is very uniform on all the sizes inside your jars. Double check that you've selected the correct research recipe given you are canning whole produce, chunks, or diced produce. So the research-based recipe that I might use for carrots is going to be different if I can whole carrots versus pieces of carrots or sliced carrots, okay? And then there again, many times research-based recipes are somewhere, we'll give you the little hint like I have over here to the right-hand side. About 11 pounds of carrots will yield 9 pints. So that's really good to know, whether you're going to the farmer's market or whether you've been harvesting carrots out of your own garden. How many carrots do I need to harvest to be able to determine if it's time to start canning so that I can produce how many pints or quarts? Okay, the hot pack method. The hot pack method is you take fresh produce, is heated to a boiling, and then you allow it to simmer for 5 minutes prior to filling your jars. And there again, you remove that once it's simmered for 5 minutes, at a hot, hard boil. You remove it from heat, and then that's when you put it in your clean and sterilized jars. And then there again, you add hot water that you have on the stove as well. That's at least 180 degrees Fahrenheit to the jars, and you want to cover any produce. So you want to have hot liquid at 180 degrees to cover any product that's in that jar. And the hot pack method is going to mean less food is going to float. So there again, boiling produce allows air to leave produce cells. So if you have already boiled that produce that you're putting in there in the hot pack method, they're already full of water. So you're going to have less floating of food when you have a finished canned product. This is a preferred method for most of your foods. Hot packing is. It'll take fewer jars because the food is going to be pliable and easier to pack. And hot packing, you're going to have a better color in your final product, as well as it's going to retain flavor better in hot packing. So then the raw pack is unheated produce, so unheated carrots are then just merely packed into clean and sterilized jars. And this is raw pack is known as a method for foods that lose shape when cooked. You need liquid that at least 140 degrees Fahrenheit to fill those. So if I raw pack my jars with raw carrots, I'm going to fit in as many as I possibly can, but I'm not going to hold as much as if they were cooked and a little soft. But then I'm going to cover them with this 140 degree Fahrenheit water over all the carrots in the jar. Pack foods firmly in raw pack jars, but don't crush them. And this allows the food to float. Air can be trapped in produce cells. So there again, I've not boiled them or heated up these carrots. So the carrots are going to float, and I'm going to find that I just have liquid at the bottom of my final product. This can result of raw packing in more discoloration of produce. But there again, there's no safety concerns. It's just the end product and what you're looking at from a quality standpoint. So preparation, you want to pack your produce in your jars. There again, you're going to follow the recipe. And with carrots specifically today, we need to leave a 1-inch head space. So there again, no matter whether I hot packed or raw packed, I'm leaving a head inch or a head space of 1 inch at the top. And that's even after I pour in that liquid, whether it's 140 or 180 degrees Fahrenheit, I have to accommodate for 1 inch of head space. And then removing the air bubbles means that I'm going to take a plastic or a wooden spoon and run around the edge of the filled jar to pop any air bubbles down in there. And then I would recommend that you wipe down the rim of the jar with a single-use damp paper towel, wipe it around there, and then that's when you're going to put your 2-piece lid on there, your flat and your band. And then those jars are ready to be placed in your canner. And your canner at this point has that 2 to 3 inches of water. And you're going to, that water should already start be heating up to at least 140 or 180 degrees, depending on the style of pack that you've chosen. When it comes to canning salt, you'll see the note over to the right-hand side. Canning salt is merely added for flavor and can be eliminated altogether, or even for a healthier choice of pressure canning, maybe try adding half a teaspoon of canning salt rather than a full teaspoon, or reducing what the recipe calls for. Canning salt is only for flavor when you talk pressure canning. If you talk pickling, it's totally different. Many times salt is needed for the pickling process. So we're talking about carrots or beans or some kind of low acid produce here. So then we've added the jars to our canner. We place the jars in there. After they have them on there, we're going to close the rack down. We're going to use jar lifters because the water, that 2 to 3 inches of water in our canner, is going to be hot. So we do not want to burn ourselves. So using that jar lifter is really a great idea. And then once we get our canner full, we're going to close the lid. And closing a pressure canner lid sometimes takes a little trick. And I know several weeks ago when we talked about equipment, I told you to kind of practice how you line up your pressure canner lid with the base of the canner so that you can, shut it up and kind of understand how it's going to close, because it is a tricky, kind of more difficult. And then you want to leave that weight off or open up your petcock completely at the time that you're closing it, just putting your filled jars in there. And then you're going to begin to heat it to the highest setting. And you're going to do this for quite a while. It could take 30 minutes, 45 minutes to get steam and pressure built up in that pressure pot or pressure canner with that weight off until the steam begins to flow freely. And I want to show you the next picture. So what you're trying to do is this picture here on the right, you want to keep that pressure canner with the lid tight now, heating up, but you don't put the weight on that until you have a steady stream of steam like what you see in my extra upper picture. And then you can see the lower picture there shows putting that weight on there. Then you're going to lift it on. I always use a pot holder just because I'm a little concerned with that steam coming out, that I don't want it to hit me. And you're going to have that steam flowing in a steady stream for a good 10 minutes before you put the weight on there. And then at that point is when it's safe to place the weight on there, close the petcock, and then you're going to turn your attention to your weighted gauge or to that dial gauge so that it'll start building pressure to the exact pressure that you need for your recipe. You're going to pressure. Once that pressure reaches, say with those carrots, 12 pounds, that's when you're going to turn your timer on and you are going to start timing. Or if you have a weighted gauge, it's going to start rocking. And when it gets to a nice jiggling sound is when you're going to set it for the processing time. And that pressure must be maintained. And there again, when you pressure can, you must stay there because you maybe will have to adjust heat slowly to maintain a steady pressure. And on my gas stove top, I know I have to even turn it down at times because it could go up way above where I want it to go. So if the pressure drops below the required level of pressure, you need to bring it back up to that required level, and then you'll start processing all over again. So you really need to maintain this to make sure that this process, which is not fast, pressure canning is not a fast process, but you need to maintain it at all times and watch it. So there again, you maintain the pressure of the timer. And there again, here's our carrot recipe. So we're going to 12 pounds and we have to then start timing after we've had that steam exhaust for a good 10 minutes, we set the timer for 25 minutes. Okay. So then the next step is then once we've reached our whole, the timer goes off, it's been 25 minutes, we've processed the full length of time. Then we're going to turn off the heat on the stove. You can remove the canner, but there again, these are big canners, usually very heavy. I just turn my burner off and leave it sit there. And then you need to allow that canner to sit there naturally and cool. And so here's the recommendation, 30 minutes for pints, 45 minutes for quarts. And I will tell you, however long it took you to build that pressure, it's going to take that length to depressurize your pressure canner and have that dial gauge 0 clear out. And there again, some newer models, vent locks that show the depressurization process, but a lot of older canners do not. So just do not rush it. Do not rush it. let that pressure drop fully before you try opening it up. When you know that the pressure's dropped, then you can remove the weight or open up that petcock. And there again, USDA would recommend that you wait an additional 10 minutes before you try, turning the lid and lifting the lid off. And then once you do that, you're going to lift your finalized processed product out of there with the jar lifter because they're going to be hot. And you want to lift those jars straight up and out. And you can use a cooling rack like what's in this picture here, or I use a double-lined, double padded towel. Somehow they can, but when you raise them up out of there, there's going to be a little bit of water that has built up around the rim of that top. Don't dump that off into the can. Lift them straight up and out. And you will see that that is really one more assurance that you get a sealed, safe product to let that water that's pulled up on the lid to evaporate naturally. Okay, so use your jar lifter, place it on a clean towel, leaving, 1 inch or some space between jars. And you want to leave those then processed jars undisturbed for 12 to 24 hours. So there again, at least you don't have to be there. They can sit there undisturbed without you being in the room. Then once 24 hours of it have come by, you want to come back to your product. You want to remove any of the screw-on bands, check the seal. This can of sauerkraut here, I should be able to pick up, and that gold flat that's up on there that you see in the picture should be sealed. If they're not sealed, you should determine, are we going to refrigerate them, freeze them, or are we going to dump them out all over again and reprocess immediately? That's why they need to be checked in 24 hours, and then you can still create a safe product by refrigerating, freezing, or completely reprocessing. And then I would recommend that you wash your jars and your lids to remove any residue and then label it. And you can see up on the top of mine, I've written sauerkraut and the date up there. And then you want to store these in a cool, dark place at that time. Okay, canning with an electric pressure canner. I just want to say my picture is fuzzy here, but this is like an Instapot or a multi-cooker. Many of these multi-cookers promote that you can pressure and boil water can in these. You cannot do that in these pressure canners or pressure pots in multi-cookers, however you want to say it. They do not. You need to have a specific pressure canner that's for food preservation, not a multi-cooker Instapot. It's too much of a gamble. You have to know exact poundage and at the time that you reach a full rolling boil. And you do not know that in a multi-cooker. Okay, only safe method for preserving all meats and vegetables is by pressure canning. You never process low acid foods using the boiling water method. That's why this pressure canning method is really worthwhile to get to know and even know the parts of the canner so you can have some assurity that there's lots of safety things on there, that you're not going to be unsafe to use a pressure canner. If processed according to an approved USDA recommendation, you're going to have a safe canned low acid product that is shelf stable for up to 12 months. Okay, here's some reminders. Only use up-to-date research-based recipes, and I've given some resources and I'm going to cite that again, but go to the National Home Food Preservation website, go to any land-grant institution, go to Nebraska Extension's food.unl.edu website. Make sure you adjust for your elevation. Only use canning jars that are in good condition. Only use two-piece lids. It doesn't matter the brand of two-piece lid. There's lots of different brands out there, and I've used a lot of them. And as we've seen the price go up, I don't have a preference, one brand over another for the two-piece lid. Make sure you follow the directions on the two-piece lid, though. Use new canning flats every time. So the rings can be used from year to year, but that canning flat, once you open up a home canned product, then that flat has done its job and needs to be thrown away. Fill jars to the proper amount of headspace for your food. So make sure you've read the recipe and you know what headspace is required by the recipe and the type of food that you're going to be preserving. Check your pressure canning gauge annually. Go find an extension office here in the state of Nebraska to calibrate that gauge. Or I would think other states have opportunities. Ace Hardware, some other commercial stores like that probably do some calibration of pressure canner gauges. Check your canner gasket, that safety fuse on an annual basis, and make sure that it's still pliable and that rubber is flexible. Here's your resources. And I know I've sent this in an email to most of you, but there again, the National Center for Home Food Preservation is a great resource. It's maintained by the University of Georgia Agriculture for the USDA. There's our Nebraska Extension website. So any of those, and then there again, find a source so that you can figure out what your elevation is for where you're living or where you're going to be home preserving. Okay. And then here again is my virtual post evaluation that I would encourage you to take. Put in that QR code, or you can merely lift your phone up and use your camera, hover over this QR code and answer a feedback questions for me. I would really appreciate it to see if there's value in this virtual series that we're doing. And there again, any questions on my next slide, I think I'm going to show my email again. So if you have questions or concerns, email me at any time. Give me a call here in North Platte, 308-532-2683, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. But I would encourage you to complete this evaluation so that I have some impact and some responses to the value of this type of virtual program. Okay, and here's my email again. And I just want to wish you all great success as we go into the canning season. I'm getting excited getting my garden seeds all purchased and making sure I have the various garden varieties that I want to have for those things that I want to home can this summer. And happy canning, happy pressure canning. I hadn't done pressure canning a whole lot until about 6-7 years ago, and I have no concern over it other than it's a lengthy process. And every year that I pressure can, it comes to mind one grandmother that I had that did a lot of home canning, and boy, did she work. And I'm pretty wimpy, and I do a limited supply compared to what she used to do. But we, probably years ago in my grandmother's time as a homemaker, she didn't have as much availability at the supermarket for the same cost. But it's really fun to see the healthier way that you can do things and knowing where it comes and knowing that you can go to your cellar or to your basement canning room and have products that you've grown and put a lot of love into. So good luck. I'll see you in 2 weeks for our next food preservation or virtual series, which is on jams and jellies. So reach out if you didn't get signed up for that. You'll have to email me to be able to get signed up for that. But there again, there's my email. Thank you.